whistleblower and the president's right to present a defense. That is the piece by my man Andy McCarthy, who is, of course, at National Review, also Fox News contributor. He joins us now to tell us what's going on. Andy, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Buck. How are you?
I'm good. All right, so let's get into this, because I've been talking about this for a while. That there's a concept here of the right to confront your accuser, and then there's the actual specific law of when you have a legal right to confront the accuser. Can you just kind of walk us through here the differentiation between, whether the whistleblower as a function of law needs to testify versus whether in a fair process set up by the Congress, the whistleblower would in fact testify?
Yeah, I think the latter you could say for sure, Buck. In a fair process, he could be called to testify. There's so much legal confusion about all this, and people are throwing a lot of half-baked ideas around, not least the idea of whistleblower itself. I've tried to point out that this fellow who's been identified elsewhere, if that is the guy we're talking about, he's been called a whistleblower, and maybe in some sort of descriptive, non-legal sense, he's a whistleblower, like a common usage sense of that term. But under the only sense that matters, the statutory sense, he's not a whistleblower, because the statute that they're relying on relates to intelligence activities that are under the jurisdiction of the Director of National Intelligence. This guy is not reporting on intelligence activities. He's reporting on the president's activities, specifically the conduct of foreign policy with a counterpart in Ukraine, a foreign national or a foreign government. That is not what's covered in that statute. So he's not a whistleblower, even though the Trump intelligence community decided to treat him as one in an abundance of caution. So he doesn't even qualify for whistleblower status and under the law. And even if he did, the whistleblower protections that would be afforded to him would be against reprisals. Other than the Inspector General of the intelligence community, no one is required to give the whistleblower anonymity, and even the Inspector General is not required to give it to him under all circumstances. For example, if you refer a matter to a prosecutor for trial, the expectation is that the whistleblower could become a witness, where he would have to be public. So, the whole idea of him being a whistleblower and entitled to anonymity is bogus. And then we get to this whole business of, confrontation clause and should he be required to testify. The confrontation clause only gives a defendant in a criminal prosecution, and impeachment is not a criminal prosecution. But even if it applied, you would only get the right to confront the witnesses that the prosecutor chooses to call in the trial. So if you analogize the Democrats to a prosecutor in a criminal case, if they don't call the witness, the whistleblower, so-called, as a witness, then you wouldn't have a Sixth Amendment confrontation clause right to call him or to cross-examine him at the trial. And finally, that's why I've argued that what they should be talking about here is not the president's confrontation rights, it's his right to present a defense. And in any proceeding that's not a kangaroo court, you always get that.
Is the president being afforded any right to present a defense from what you're seeing so far?
Not at this stage, and that's because I think bogusly the Democrats are equating, at least when it's convenient to them to do it, they are equating this phase, this intelligence committee phase run by Adam Schiff of their investigation, they're equating that to a grand jury. Now, in a grand jury proceeding, the prosecutor is not required to present exculpatory evidence to the grand jury, because the only thing the grand jury is there to decide is the limited question of whether there's probable cause that a crime got committed, such that the prosecutor should be able to get an indictment, and then you bring the case to a trial court where the defendant would get to present his defense and have all those rights, et cetera. The reason I say that Schiff is only doing that grand jury analogy when it's convenient for him is that the trade-off for prosecutors is, yes, in the grand jury, you get to give the grand jurors only your version of events, and you can muzzle the defense's version of events, but it's all got to be done in secret so that you don't prejudice the defendant. And what Schiff is trying to do here is have the best of both worlds.
Right. It's a
him.
leaky grand jury.
He wants to, exactly right. He wants to muzzle the exculpatory evidence, muzzle the president's defense, but he wants to take what he thinks are the best witnesses to him and go public with it, which is why I think that people who are describing this as a show trial are exactly right about that.
Now, this point that was made, I don't know if you saw it on The View, Andy, that it could be a crime to speak the name of the alleged whistleblower. How do people with legal degrees say this stuff on TV? I just want to know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I spent 20 years in courtrooms with people with legal degrees saying all kinds of crazy stuff. So I got to tell you, sometimes that comes with the territory. But I find, though, that when they're talking on television, what went on in the courtroom seems modest. That is just, it's nonsense. There's no legal prescription against mentioning the whistleblower. And in fact, if the whistleblower was blowing a whistle on a Democrat, the media would not only report the name, they would lecture you about the public's right to know and how that takes precedence over needs for secrecy and all that stuff. So it always, with these guys, depends on whose ox is being gored. So now, it's a Republican president, so the whistleblower is, one of humanity's great heroes.
Yeah, their situational ethics are highly flexible, acrobatic even.
I would say.
I would ask Andy, what are you expecting this week? Now that this stuff's coming out in the open, give us your preview of where you think, where are they going to take this based on everything that Schiff and the Democrats have been doing so far? And also, what do you think Republicans' response should be in the Congress?
Yeah, I think this part, for the Democrat standpoint, Buck, this 3 or 4 days of hearings, whatever it's going to be this week, is going to be pretty scripted. They've picked out the handful of witnesses that they think are best for them to bruise up President Trump. They're essentially going to deny the Republicans the right to call witnesses that would put these things in context. So what the Republicans want to show is that if the president was demanding investigations of the Bidens and investigations of corruption, it was because Ukraine is pervasively corrupt. There's reason to believe, good faith reason to believe, the Bidens were engaged in corrupt self-dealing. And what the Republicans also want to show is there's a 2016 election component, of a Ukraine component, in what we would think of as the Durham investigation into the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation. What I mean by that is there's a lot of reporting that the Obama administration leaned on Ukraine to do things like investigate Paul Manafort, who was temporarily Trump's campaign chairman. And there's also evidence that Ukrainian officials colluded with the Clinton campaign. And that's just not me. That's not just me saying that. A Ukrainian court has found that to be the case. So I think the Republicans want to bring all of this out in order to place in context exactly what President Trump was asking of President Zelensky of Ukraine. And naturally, the Democrats want to keep all of that out and then suggest that, Trump was simply doing nothing other than demanding an investigation of his political rival for potential violations of Ukrainian law. And they want to, of course, then make the argument that, the federal government, the American federal government exists to protect us from foreign regimes. We shouldn't have a president encouraging a foreign regime to investigate an American citizen for violations of Ukrainian law.
Now, Andy, I want to ask you, because Politico, for example, reported this recently. According to Giuliani, Ukrainian officials conspired with the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee to help boost the Democratic nominee's campaign and damage Trump's candidacy. No evidence has emerged to support that idea. That's Politico, which was the rival of The Hill, where I used to work, just for full disclosure, right? And then you go back to January of 2017, Also in Politico, not retracted or amended, the following.
Right.
Ukrainian efforts to sabotage Trump backfire. Kiev officials are scrambling to make amends with the president-elect after quietly working to boost Clinton. And it goes on to talk about how Ukrainian officials tried to help Hillary Clinton and undermine Trump by publicly questioning his fitness for office. They also disseminated documents implicating a top Trump aide in corruption and suggested they were investigating the matter, only to back away after the election. They helped Clinton's allies research damaging information on Trump and his advisors, according to Politico. So which Politico do we believe, Andy? And a more serious question, is this denied? Is this not what happened? Because if this is what happened, then everybody that's running around screaming treason for Trump asking a country to investigate what seemed to me to be quite a corrupt arrangement needs to explain why it was okay for the Obama administration to do that to try to help Hillary during the election.
Yeah, Buck, I think what we need to watch very carefully here is if you listen to the things that Adam Schiff says and the way they are being reported in the media, what he's now saying is that what Trump was looking for was an investigation into what he calls a refuted conspiracy theory about Ukraine being connected somehow to CrowdStrike, which is the outfit that
looked at the server, right? The DNC server.
Exactly. Right. So what Schiff is trying to do is miniaturize this into saying what Trump was asking for was an investigation into whether the Ukrainians had something to do with the DNC server. And that may be a conspiracy theory that doesn't have much in the way of legs, but the story of Ukraine's connection to the Obama administration's investigation of the Trump campaign in 2016 has a lot more to it than the server and CrowdStrike. So I think what we should do is sort of carefully watch Schiff and watch the way he is parsing that end of it, because, obviously, again, there is a whole angle involving the Obama administration leaning on the Ukrainians to investigate Manafort, and a Ukrainian legislator and the head of the Ukrainian so-called anti-corruption police leaking information to the media that was harmful to Manafort with the intention of trying to help the Clinton campaign. I mean, that's out there, and that's the reason the Republicans have asked for these witnesses that are connected to those things is precisely because they want to put all that out in public and try to put the president's comments in context.
So there is a serious possibility here based on reporting from news organizations that didn't realize then that this would be helpful to Republicans perhaps now, that there was outreach from the Obama administration to go after a Trump campaign chairman at the time, right? Which would certainly look a lot like asking for foreign interference in an election, whether or not Manafort was dirty.
Yeah, and Buck, I would underscore a Ukrainian court has found that the Ukrainian legislator and the head of the anti-corruption police colluded with an American campaign, namely the Clinton campaign, in order to interfere in the American election. They've found that. So, this is not something we're pulling out of the sky.
And what's going on, real quick, before we let you go back to the rest of your life, what's going on here with the delayed report on FISA abuse? Now I'm hearing, I heard it was going to be Halloween. Then I heard it was going to be before Thanksgiving. Now it's like I'm hearing hopefully before the next election, practically. Well, what's going on? Any ideas?
Well, I still think it's going to be. I hope it's before Thanksgiving, but I think it'll be reasonably soon. And I think, Buck, that all that's going on here, I've heard some theories that are out there that, maybe he's dragging his feet because he doesn't want to step on whatever Durham is doing. That's the latest theory. My own theory, for what it's worth, is that Horowitz has indicated to Congress and to the Justice Department that he's done and that they are in the final rushes of putting the report out. And my sense of it is that the sheer bulk of this report, remember the Clinton emails one was like 500 or 600 pages. This is going to be a bigger report than that, maybe hundreds of pages longer. And they have to do a line by line with every intelligence agency that has equity in terms of anything that's designated as classified information, and Barr's got to do a review about, what stays classified and what gets unclassified. And I just think that that's a complicated process to get through with a document that's going to turn out to be very, very long. And
Is Durham the real deal, by the way?
case.
I've been reading about him, and it seems like he is the guy that we would want looking into this.
You talking Durham?
Durham up in Connecticut, yeah.
Yeah. Durham's a terrific guy. He's an excellent prosecutor. I happen to know him personally. I haven't worked with him, but I know him and think very well of him. Judge Mukasey, the former AG of the Bush administration, who did not only work with him but picked him to do the investigation involving the CIA interrogations, thinks the world of him, which goes a long way in my book. But he's done these kinds of investigations, Buck, for administrations of both parties going back to the Clinton administration, and everybody says that, he's a very scrupulous guy who you won't hear from because he doesn't talk to the media, and he puts his nose to the grindstone and gets the job done. He's not fast. If that's what people are looking for, they're not going to get that, but he's thorough.
All right. Andy McCarthy, everybody, check out his latest on nationalreview.com, The Whistleblower and the President's Right to Present a Defense. Andy, thanks so much for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure, Buck.
Andy's the best, isn't he? It's always so fun to have Andy McCarthy on. As good as any legal analyst you'll find anywhere, and honest about it all. The poll that I mentioned before about how Democrats are crazy, it's a real poll. Axios reporting on it today. Here's what you got. More than 70% of Democrats say politics is making them increasingly angry about America, leaving them feeling like strangers in their own land, according to an Axios on HBO poll. The big picture, Americans as a whole are just plain mad and feeling like strangers in their own land. Republicans, 57% are angry compared to 74% of Democrats. 71% of Democrats say they feel like a stranger in their own land. Folks, 7 out of 10 people in this survey who are Democrats are saying, by the way, 5 out of 10 are Republican, but, there's always going to be some angry people. Life is frustrating and difficult. But 7 out of 10 Democrats, according to this poll, are angry right now because of politics specifically. Because of politics. So when I tell you that there's a mass delusion, there's a mass hysteria, the Democrats have lost it, the numbers back me up. I'm not just pulling this stuff out of nowhere. The numbers suggest what I'm saying is true because here's the thing. It is true. I think we understand that. Democrats have gone crazy. They have been broken in the Trump era and have no interest in trying to set things right in any way other than that. Or rather, in any way that does not involve the removal of this president from office and from power. That much is very clear at this point in time.
The DACA kids, all they want to do is become Americans. They came here when they were little. They weren't, they didn't cross the border themselves. Their parents brought them. And so many of them are in our armed forces. So many of them are going to college and trying to make a good life for themselves. There's broad consensus, Democrats, independents, Republicans, that DACA ought to pass, and I hope the courts will uphold that.
Oh, my friends. So much dishonesty around the immigration debate. It's one of the most difficult conversations to have with liberals these days because they've just been told so much that is not true, and they are so insistent on it being true. We have a couple of very important dynamics happening, or immigration issues, I should say, occurring right now. One has to do with the border, which I'll get into in a moment, and the I shouldn't say the securing of the border, but the more effective efforts at securing the border compared to where we were some months ago. But first, I want to talk about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is going to get heard by the Supreme Court, I believe, tomorrow, and there should be a decision made by the court sometime in June of 2020. So we're not going to get a final ruling on this for a while. But there are some very important issues at stake here. And every news report you read about this is just going to be kids who are great, who are aspiring for the American dream, who they're all valedictorians, they all want to serve in the military. All they do is just be amazing all the time. And big, bad, mean Republicans are supporting the administration, which is saying that The DACA program needs to end. There is, before I get into DACA itself, because this is what they're going to skip past right away, there's a rule of law issue that is very much at stake here. And that is really the prime issue, the primary concern that I have about this, because the Obama administration, very explicitly, you'll remember this, they said that they wanted comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama relied upon his power as the chief executive of the United States government, he said, as an executive order, to just declare that there would no longer be enforcement of duly passed congressional statutes about illegal presence in America under immigration law. President Obama just said, look, Congress isn't doing what I want Congress to do, so I'm just going to do what I want to do, and I don't care about what message that sends. I don't care about the rule of law and the effects on the rule of law as a result of this. So Obama just said, we will do this thing where you don't deport dreamers. He made a decision as commander-in-chief, as the president of the United States at the time. President Trump comes into office and says, okay, put aside for a moment whether you like the idea of DACA or not. The Trump administration is arguing something very straightforward here. What one president can do via executive authority can be, when it's one policy issue, can be undone via executive authority, especially because the entirety of the DACA argument, as it was offered up at the time, was that it was just a prosecutorial prioritization maneuver that also allowed people under DACA by executive fiat, this was just conjured out of thin air, to work. They register, they're allowed to work, and they're allowed to stay in the United States, and they have to renew their DACA protection. So it created this process for people to stay in the country, even though they're actually in the country illegally. And the Trump administration came in and said, okay, well, we don't want to do this because this is an extra legal or illegal program. This was not passed by Congress. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And at a minimum, you would think that the Trump administration would have the same discretion to not prosecute. The Trump administration would have that discretion and be in a position to prosecute, or in this sense, remove the prohibition on prosecution. That's all. By the way, I don't think that people, even if the DACA program ended, I think that they'd be a very low prioritization for deportation anyway. And I do think that this is why there's such a focus on DACA, that these are the people who are they have the most sympathetic cases for being in the country illegally. But then there should also be an understanding, well, if we're not going to just enforce the law as is, there should be a quid pro quo, dare I say, that DACA, if the Republicans were to go along with DACA for the Democrats, but if it meant real meaningful border security and reform of immigration laws, that's a bargaining chip that could be used. Instead, what happened was a court, no surprise, I'm sure it was an Obama appointee, although I don't know that, but I'm guessing it was an Obama appointee with the ruling, said, sorry, under the Administrative Procedure Act, this is arbitrary and capricious. Therefore, the president cannot undo what a president before him did because the judge says so. Now, there are some who would argue that this isn't even really in the purview of a federal judge to review. That's one argument. Then there's also, how is it possible that, can one president not end the war that another president starts under the Administrative Procedure Act? I mean, this is when you start to see a lawlessness from these institutions that are supposed to be upholding the rule of law. This is where you see an abandoning of principle and of following legal text, and its replacement with the whims of people who happen to be on the judiciary. It's absurd. Here you had the founder of SCOTUS blog tweeted this out. I thought this was great. SCOTUS blog is a Supreme Court blog. All they do is cover Supreme Court stuff. He wrote, "This is an enormously important, stupid case. Enormously important for the individuals involved in immigration policy, but stupid, because if Barack Obama can create the program real Donald Trump can withdraw it. Yeah. This is very straightforward. This is not complicated stuff. What one president can decide to do, another president can decide not to do. If it is within presidential discretion, right? If one person's allowed to walk into a store and say, I want to buy, strawberry ice cream or chocolate ice cream, I'm going to go with or vanilla, I'm going to go with strawberry. Another person can walk into the store if they have that same consumer discretion and say, I'm going to get the Rocky Road ice cream or the strawberry or whatever it is. Right? You have a problem if the same choice cannot be made by the same people given the same authority under the law. So what's the answer here? Hashtag resistance. Judge doesn't like it. Taking away DACA status is mean. Administrative Procedure Act? You've got to be kidding me. But what that means is that this is because I say so in legalese from a judge. Why can't you do this? Yeah, in violation of the administrative, because there's not enough notice here under blah, blah, blah. Come on. This is entirely nonsensical stuff, but there are major implications here, major implications for rule of law, and it's also just a reminder of the length the judiciary has been willing to go to in order to undermine President Trump and in the process undermine the very federal judiciary itself. The lengths have been extreme. And then you have just the border overall right now. You have a 75% decrease in illegal border crossings since May, and this is attributable to Trump administration policies. The Trump administration has taken some important steps that have been very helpful in trying to stop this situation from continuing on. You had 130, just to give you some numbers of what's going on at the border, 132,000 arrests at our southern border back in May. Those are illegal crossings, people caught. So 132,000 are caught. How many got across? Think about that. And then also, it's down to 36,000 in October. What are some of the moves? Let's take a little stock here, because I was very much involved in trying to publicize what was going on at the border. I spent time at a couple of border sectors with Border Patrol, trying to get the word out. A lot of appearances on Tucker Carlson's show. Wrote a couple of articles in thehill.com. One of them actually got shared by the official Trump and White House Twitter accounts about the scams going on at our southern border with immigration. So what has changed? What has been the shift here? We have a few things. One, Mexico, at the behest of the Trump administration, has decided to step up immigration enforcement. So the Mexican government, with pressure from the Trump administration, has said that has actually put more of its own National Guard troops at its border with Central American countries, and then stopped the inflow into Mexico, which is obviously very helpful because the inflow to Mexico becomes the inflow in the United States. Mexico has also agreed to have 55,000 migrants remain in Mexico. And guess what? Turns out that people who are told you can apply for asylum in the United States, but you have to wait in Mexico while you do it, some of them are going all the way back to Central America. Now, there are two ways that this will be described. The media, well, first of all, that program is facing legal challenges. So you have all the different open borders advocates, the Democrat Party, of course, leading the charge, all these different open borders advocates who are saying, oh, no, you can't work out. The United States does not have the sovereign right to work out an agreement with Mexico where they keep asylum seekers in Mexico waiting for their day in court in the United States. They want to fight that because we all understand what the incentive is here. The incentive all along was show up at the southern border, claim that you're fleeing gang violence, read practically from a script about what you have to say to get into the country to pass that first credible fear test. And then once you're in the United States, you're good. Now you're home free. Don't worry about it. You're out of custody. They're not going to find you again. You're not going to show up for your hearing. If you do show up, you got to show up a few times before they can even take any action against you. You can fight against your actual extradition, even when you lose your asylum appeal. I mean, it's impossible. You're going to be good. So all you got to do is get into the country, get out of detention, and you're good to go. And that was the whole game. Turns out when people are told, hey, guess what? You got to wait in Mexico, they go, oh, The scam isn't going to work anymore. Got to go back to Central America. Better to go back to the country that many of whom would claim was a threat to their very lives than to just wait a few months maybe in Mexico for their asylum hearing. That seems to be a strange choice. Although it's not a strange choice if you aren't really fleeing gang violence, you're just an economic migrant, and you're trying to find a way to game the system to get into America, which is what a vast majority of the Central American migrants were doing, as told to me by Border Patrol, and as I was able to find when we would hear in some cases, the actual arrests going on of these Central American migrants when they were telling their stories to Border Patrol when I was there. So that's another thing. And then they have instituted a policy where if you pass through Mexico and don't at first try to get asylum in Mexico if you're from Central America, then you cannot claim asylum in the United States. Essentially, you cannot go jurisdiction shopping or nation-state shopping as an asylee. If you're really claiming asylum, if you're under mortal threat, if you're oppressed and fleeing, tyranny, the first country that isn't going to tyrannize and threaten you is the one that you should be asking for asylum in. You don't get to say, well, I want the best, richest, biggest welfare benefit country in the Western Hemisphere. You're not allowed to do that anymore to the Trump administration. Oh, of course, the libs are very upset about that. And then one other thing here. Not getting a lot of attention. I remember there were some so-called, conservatives, some of them were never Trumpers, who were very upset about the declaration of a state of emergency that Trump made. Ooh, are all of our civil rights being trampled on because of the Trump declaration of emergency? Well, it turns out that by the end of 2020, the Trump administration is hoping to have constructed 450 miles because of the declaration of emergency and the moving of funds within the federal budget to the border wall construction. They're hoping to have 450 miles of border wall by the end of 2020. If Trump gets close to 500 miles of new wall, not just upgraded fence, new wall, whatever we're calling it, those build-the-wall chants are going to be very loud going into what I think will be his reelection. People said he'd never do it, never happened, can't happen. Well, if they really are on track, if this is correct, this is reporting the Wall Street Journal, to put up 450 miles of wall by the end of this year, or by the end of next year, I think you'd have to consider that a promise kept, or at least close to a promise kept, a promise in progress on something that critics of the Trump administration were saying all along, absolutely impossible. There's no way that he'd be able to pull that off. So we will continue to watch the border and the administration's response to it.
I'm worried that we're running out of time. Every time the scientists reanalyze the data, it's worse than they thought. So when they thought we had this much time to do something, it turns out when they reanalyze the data, it's this much time, and that it's this much time. We've got to be moving on every front. This is our only planet, and I think of the responsibility that we have to future generations. We didn't inherit this earth from our grandparents. We're borrowing it from our grandchildren. And we have a responsibility to leave them an earth that is sustainable, an earth that will support life.
And I don't know about you, but I refuse and reject and absolutely will not accept the choice of I refuse to accept the choice of leaving a planet that is diminished and dying to the next generation. I refuse to choose that. And because we refuse to choose that, then what we have no choice to do is to act.
To do exactly what they say. What Warren says, what AOC says, there's no choice here. You must do what they say because the planet is at stake. These people are nuts, folks. This is crazy. This is crazy. What's amazing is when you speak to people who think they're very sophisticated, very, very educated, wealthy, erudite across the country in the liberal enclaves, they look at you like you're nuts if you don't think the world is going to end in 10 years unless we listen to complete nincompoops in the Democratic Party who don't know a thing about a thing, and let them run the entire economy and let them transform the global economy without a basic understanding of how economics works. And just how much crazier can it get? How much more bonkers can the Democratic Party be before there is some kind of reckoning, some kind of awakening about what is really going on here?